Some funerals don't just bury the dead, they bury the truth of an entire family. The rain came down in slow, deliberate sheets, the kind that soaks through every layer until you forget what dry feels like. I stood at the edge of the open grave in Magnolia Cemetery, umbrella trembling in my grip, watching the coffin descend with the soft, wet thud of soil hitting wood. Maris Sutter. My mother's name carved into gray granite looked like a mistake someone would correct any second now. But no one did. The priest murmured promises of peace I couldn't hear over the rain and the hollow space where my father should have been standing. People shifted behind me. Black coats, black umbrellas, quiet sobs rising and falling like distant waves. Whispers cut sharper than the wind. "Where's Garrick?" He didn't come. I didn't turn. Already knew. My phone had buzzed 10 minutes earlier, a single impatient line from him. "Busy with work. Handle the funeral. I'll take care of the paperwork." "No, I'm sorry." "No, are you okay?" Just instructions, the way he'd always spoken to assistants who disappointed him. The service ended. People drifted away in small clusters, offering condolences that felt like tissue paper. Thin, well-meaning, useless. Soon it was only me, the grave, and the rain. Mud sucked at my shoes. I stared at the fresh mound of earth until my throat burned. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Then, quieter, more dangerous. "If someone did this to you, I won't forget." Lightning flickered far off, bleaching the sky white for a heartbeat. I took it as nothing. Or maybe as everything. Back in my apartment, the silence pressed harder than the storm outside. I peeled off soaked clothes, left them in a heap, sat on the couch still wearing my shoes. Eventually I opened my phone, not to check messages, but to look at old photos of her. Paint-streaked hands. Crooked smile. Pointing a finger at me in my own kitchen years ago. "Don't you dare skip breakfast again, Bram." The phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Name. Her number. I stared so long the screen dimmed. My thumb hovered. Then I opened it. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery now." My mind splintered. Boofed number. Cruel prank. Sick joke. Had to be. But my body was already moving. Keys, jacket, door slamming behind me. The rain had turned vicious by the time I reached the car. Wind shoved the door against my legs as I climbed in. Wipers fought sheets of water that turned the city into smeared red and yellow streaks. Magnolia Cemetery appeared out of the dark like something half-remembered. Iron gates slick, lamps flickering weakly through fog. I parked crooked, stepped into the cold, breath coming fast. "Mom!" My voice cracked the moment it left my mouth. Rain answered. I walked deeper, flashlight beam jerking across headstones, angel wings blurred by water. Footsteps too loud. Heart louder. Movement near the tree line. A small figure, hunched under a soaked coat. I raised the light. The beam caught her face. Pale, exhausted, impossibly alive. The flashlight slipped from my fingers, hit mud with a dull thud. "Bram!" I crossed the distance without feeling my legs. Her hands found mine, freezing, trembling, solid. "I'm here," she said quickly, gripping tighter. "You can't tell anyone. Not one person. This wasn't a reunion. This was an escape. We didn't leave together." She insisted. She led me to a narrow service road behind dripping oaks where a dull silver sedan waited. Engine off, lights dark. Inside, windows fogged instantly. She kept the car silent and spoke only after drawing a long, careful breath. "For months he pushed me to sign," she began. "Shares. Properties. A studio. Anything with my name attached." It wasn't loud. It was constant. Papers that reappeared no matter how many times I refused. Meetings that circled back to the same demand. Comply. She paused, eyes distant. The night I collapsed I'd been painting. Chest tightened. Not sudden, but after weeks of carrying something I couldn't name. Ambulance. Fluorescent lights. Antiseptic. Then your father walked in. Not worried. Carrying a folder. Asked me to sign while I could still hold a pen. She looked at me then, really looked. When I refused, he didn't argue. He left. And before he did, he said something I still feel in my throat. She didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. I survived because someone was watching. Tamsin Reed, former student, now a nurse. She'd noticed bruises weeks earlier. The way I flinched at certain questions. She prepared quietly, redirected paperwork, slowed the process, made the system record what it expected. A body that wasn't a body. Clean transfer. A death that moved through approvals without questions. Her voice dropped. But someone signed off at the end. Someone whose name I never saw. She reached for my hand again. That's why we're here, Bram. Because if he finds out I'm breathing, he'll finish what he started. And he'll make sure you're the one who helps him. The safe house in Somerville was plain by design. No photos, thick curtains, dead bolts. Tamsin arrived later with medication, bandages, a spare phone sealed in plastic. She warned me not to call anyone I trusted. Not yet. That morning I drove back to Charleston alone. Showered. Changed. Answered messages with short, empty replies. When my father called, his voice was almost gentle. I need your signature, son. Estate matters. Nothing complicated. Come by the house tonight. I agreed without hesitation. The old village house gleamed. Marble, glass, silence arranged to impress. He greeted me with a hand on my shoulder and a smile that stayed below his eyes. Spoke of moving forward. Not clinging to the dead. Protecting what was left. The folder he slid across the desk was thick. Transfers. Consolidations. My mother's name everywhere. And then I saw the signature. Perfect. Rounded. Too perfect. That isn't hers, I said. He didn't deny it. His voice cooled. Responsibilities, Bram. Consequences. Behind his desk a safe waited, half hidden by a framed family photo. I walked out knowing what came next. Midnight. House dark but awake. Security lights hummed. Parked down the street. Gloves. Bare phone off. Old key from childhood. Inside felt alert. New cameras, sensors, lights that shifted when I moved. I followed shadows instead of hallways. The office smelled of leather and polish. Everything aligned. Controlled. I moved the photo. Typed her birthday. The safe opened. Statements. Offshore transfers. Forged contracts. Insurance files. A folder with my name. Authorization forms ready for my signature. A plan that would have made me the final piece. And the drive. Plugged it in. His voice. Calm, certain, discussing contingencies, alternatives, a future without her. Copied everything. Photographed what I couldn't carry. In my haste I nudged something out of place. I didn't realize how small the mistake was until I reached my car. Phone buzzed. Unknown number. You didn't think I wouldn't notice. The call came immediately after. His voice steady. Not accusing. Informing. Destroy what you took. There will be consequences. I drove straight to Somerville. When I laid the drive on the table, my mother didn't ask what was on it. She already knew. He knows, I said. She nodded once. And we both understood. Hiding was no longer enough. The house in Somerville became something else the moment the drive hit the table. Not a hiding place anymore. A war room. Papers spread across every surface. Bank statements, transfer records, copies of contracts she'd refused to sign. Audio files queued on a borrowed laptop, volume low as if the walls could listen. Tamsin arrived before sunrise. No condolences. She rolled up her sleeves and sorted evidence into piles with surgical precision. Financial trails routed through shell accounts. Documents bearing forged signatures. Messages and recordings that showed intent, pressure, threat. We don't have time for delay, she said. Once he realizes the scale of what you took, he'll move. And he won't be careful. That was when she told me the next step. Had to call him. I stared at her. She explained slowly. If he believed I was frightened, confused, desperate to undo my mistake, he would pause. Focus on damage control. Reclaim the narrative. Buy us hours. When I dialed, I let my voice shake. I didn't know what I was doing, I said. I panicked. I'm scared of what I found, and more scared of what it means. I'll destroy everything if you promise to stop. Long silence. Then he softened. I understand grief, son. You've been manipulated. Families survive these things when sons remember their place. I hung up and felt sick. Later that morning my mother told me what else was at stake. The studio wasn't just a building. The land sat inside a trust she'd established years earlier, a structure he couldn't touch without her consent. The shares he wanted were only part of it. Without her signature, a significant portion of what he considered his empire remained locked. That was why he hadn't waited. Tamsin returned in the afternoon, face drawn. The hospital flagged irregularities, she said. Nothing formal yet. But questions are being asked. Records reviewed. Cameras checked. If pressure comes from the right direction, the spotlight turns on me. By nightfall Charleston was buzzing. A local reporter, Raina Polk, ran a piece questioning why a prominent businessman missed his wife's funeral while vacationing in Maui. The story spread. Screenshots multiplied. Comments sharpened. My father hated losing the narrative. We split the evidence. Physical copies sent from one location. Digital files uploaded from another. Encrypted backups placed in neutral hands. Tamsin handled logistics. That night a car slowed outside the safe house. Headlights swept the curtains. Gravel shifted near the fence. I watched from the dark, breath shallow. The performance had worked. Just enough to draw him closer. Rain returned before midnight. I turned off every light, drew curtains tight. The house held its breath with us. The knock came hard enough to rattle the frame. Bram! Open the door. I stepped into the entryway, opened it just enough to block him. He tried warmth first, worried father, misled son, we can talk like family. Then he pushed past me. I scanned the room, sharp, searching. Where is she? My mother stepped into the light. For the first time I saw him lose control. Face drained. Breath caught. He whispered her name like it might vanish if spoken too loudly. She didn't raise her voice. You tried to erase me. Something snapped. He shouted. Denied. Turned on me, then back to her. Claiming lies, manipulation. Said she'd faked everything. That I'd stolen documents. That the nurse acted alone. I told him the files were gone. Scattered, backed up, out of reach. Sirens cut through the rain. Red and blue flooded the windows. Agents entered. Names read. Charges listed without drama. He looked at me once more. Something dark and furious burning behind his eyes as they took him away. When the door closed, my mother sagged against me. Outside the rain kept falling. The waiting was over. The truth was out. And whatever came next would happen in the open. Charleston didn't calm after the arrest. Got louder. By noon headlines shifted from offshore transfers and forged signatures to my mother returning from the dead, like it was entertainment. Half the city called her brave. The other half called her a con artist. And me. Devoted son or bitter thief who broke into his father's office for money. Tamsin moved us to a quiet hotel near the federal courthouse. Gave us rules that felt like a second hiding. No posted locations, no walking alone, no unknown calls. This isn't over, she kept saying. This is when he fights dirtiest. He did. His attorneys filed motions that tried to flip the case inside out. Their story. Maris faked her death. Hospital fooled. I stole documents to frame a grieving husband and seize the estate. Smoke and shame built to make the jury distrust us before a single exhibit appeared. Then Sloan appeared. Not in person at first, on camera. Photos outside his lawyer's office. Carefully worded statement from a concerned friend, painting Garrick as blindsided by betrayal. Implied my mother unstable. Me manipulated. Him attacked. Same cruelty as Maui. Bright lighting, pretty packaging, ugliness underneath. Tamsin didn't let it shake her. She built our case like a chain no one could snap at a single link. Motive. Why he needed her signature, why the trust and studio land mattered, why paperwork became urgent the moment she collapsed. Conduct. What happened in the ICU, the folder, the pressure, the refusal, the escalation. Concealment. Offshore accounts, shell entities, transfers through jurisdictions he thought too distant to chase. Threat, the calls. The message that night warning of another funeral if I didn't destroy what I had. The courtroom wasn't clean. It was a battlefield with microphones. They went after Tamsin first. Reckless, criminal, nurse playing God. Suggested she forged records for attention or cash. Hammered procedural details until rescue sounded like scheme. I watched her hands tremble on the stand. Not from lies, but from finally being seen after running so long. Then my mother stood. No tears. No pleading. She spoke the way she painted. Deliberate, steady. Described the hospital room. Papers. The way he never asked if she was in pain. Only whether she could sign. Described months before. Requests becoming demands, meetings becoming traps, feeling watched in her own home. She didn't say she faked death for drama. She said she did it to stay alive. And I did it, she added, eyes forward. Because I knew if I disappeared quietly, my son would be next. The room changed on that sentence. Not instantly. But the temperature shifted. When I took the stand, they came for the break-in. You stole documents, his attorney said, voice smooth. Yes. The reporters scribbling. Before you expect this jury to believe. I expect them to believe I did it because every official door was locked by his money. Because the documents he wanted me to sign carried my mother's signature while she was supposedly dead. Because if I played nice, I'd become legal cover for what he'd already done. They tried greed. I didn't want his assets, I said, voice tight. I wanted my mother alive. I wanted her not buried twice. Once in the ground, once in paperwork. Tamsin saved the hardest piece for last. Not statements. Not transfers. Audio. His voice. Calm, practical, talking about her like a problem. Talking about alternatives if she didn't cooperate. Talking as if her absence could be managed like a balance sheet. No spin mattered. The jury heard what I heard that night in Somerville when sirens arrived. Not grief. Not love. Control. By day's end he finally looked at us. Really looked. Not as family. As variables. When the jury filed out to deliberate, my mother's fingers found mine under the table. I realized my hands were shaking. We'd done everything right. And still I felt the old fear. That power could rewrite reality if it shouted loud enough. The jury returned the next afternoon. I tried to read their faces. Failed. Guilty. The room exhaled. Guilty on fraud. Laundering. Forgery. Threats tied to effort to remove her as obstacle. He didn't explode. Went still. As if the word cut the last thread holding his posture. At sentencing the judge didn't dress it up. He'd used money like a weapon. People like tools. Tried to turn marriage into transaction. Hospital bed into signing station. Funeral into convenience. Punishment matched the scale. Decades, not years. I didn't feel triumph. I felt my lungs finally open, like I'd been underwater since Magnolia Cemetery. As marshals led him away, he turned once. Eyes landed on me. For a split second I saw the father I used to chase down hallways as a kid. Then that softness snapped back into something colder. A look that promised I'd pay for embarrassing him. Not a plea. A hook. The kind that keeps you awake. Keeps you small. Keeps you living as if you still owe him something. Side cameras swarmed. They asked my mother if it felt like victory. She felt satisfied. He paused. It doesn't feel like victory, she said. It feels like freedom. The questioners stumbled. No revenge. No celebration. Just a woman claiming her own life. When things quieted enough to think straight, I asked Tamsin the questions that still burned. How did he find Somerville so fast? It was me. Not betrayal. Carelessness. A family location service I'd forgotten was still tied to my vehicle account. A login I hadn't severed. One small thread that led straight from my fear back to the man who taught me how to hide. He didn't need an informant. He needed the control he'd already built into our lives. Then the message. I met Tamsin privately, away from lawyers, reporters, hospital corridors. I need to know, I told her. That night. The text. She hesitated, nodded. It was me. My chest tightened. You sent it from her number. She was too weak, Tamsin said quietly. Terrified he'd trace the phone. I had her device. Used it because it was the only way you'd come. If I'd messaged from mine, you would have questioned it long enough to stay home. Anger flashed. Collapsed into understanding. You didn't tell me. I couldn't. You were already on the edge. If you'd known, you might have said the wrong thing at the wrong time. You had to believe it came from her. You had to move. She took a breath. And you needed to go that night. Not the next day. Not after you'd slept. He was already accelerating paperwork. Locking things down. If you hadn't opened that safe when you did, the evidence would have been moved where none of us could reach it. So it wasn't fate. Not the universe calling on her behalf. It was a nurse who saw a bruise and decided a lie was the only way to keep a woman alive long enough to tell the truth. When Charleston became too loud to breathe, we left. Found a small place near Isle of Palms, close enough to the ocean that the air tasted like salt and clean distance. My mother paints again. Teaches a few local kids who don't know her name from headlines. I opened a small design studio. Put our names on the sign, not branding but promise. Honesty or nothing. Some nights I still hear the rain. Still see the coffin sinking. Still feel the flashlight catching her face among the trees. But the fear loosens its grip. One evening we sat on the porch with tea, watching the sky darken over water. Her hands steady as she lifted the cup. Live hands. Real hands. I realized I wasn't scanning the street anymore. Not waiting for headlights. Not bracing for the next threat disguised as family. We didn't get everything back. Maybe we never will. But we got the one thing he never understood the value of until he lost it. The right to live without asking permission. When a story like this ends, it doesn't always feel like a win. Feels like an exhale. Like the moment you realize you've been holding your breath for years. And maybe that's what we carry forward. The truth can be delayed. Buried under paperwork and polished smiles. But it still finds air. Especially when one person chooses to protect life over image. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is name what's happening. Draw a line. Stop calling it love when it's control. Not to punish. Just to finally live without fear in our own skin. And to keep our hearts tender without letting them be used. Years pass faster than grief ever warns you they will. The house near Isle of Palms never felt like a victory prize. It felt like borrowed time we had finally earned the right to keep. Salt air drifted through open windows most mornings, carrying the low rumble of waves that never quite reached the porch. My mother painted in the small sunroom we'd converted. Large canvases now, bold strokes of cobalt and cadmium that had nothing to do with hiding anymore. She taught twice a week at a community center down the road. Children mostly. Kids who called her Miss Maris, and never asked why her hands sometimes trembled when she demonstrated a brush technique. I kept the design studio small by choice. A handful of freelance contracts, local branding for restaurants and galleries that didn't care about headlines from 3 years earlier. Our names shared the sign outside, Sutter and Sutter, not as a brand flex but as quiet defiance. We existed. Together. Without permission. Most days felt ordinary. That was the miracle of it. But ordinary has edges. Some nights the rain would start again. Soft at first, then insistent, and I'd wake with the smell of wet cemetery soil in my throat. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, listening to the roof drum, waiting for the old panic to crest and pass. It always did, eventually. But it never left completely. My mother noticed. She never said much about it. Instead she'd leave the kettle on low when she heard me moving around after midnight. We'd sit at the kitchen table in the dark, 2 mugs of chamomile between us, saying very little. Sometimes she'd reach across and cover my hand with hers. Live. Warm. No tremor. One August evening the sky stayed bruise-purple long after sunset. We were on the porch again, rocking chairs creaking in rhythm with the cicadas. She set her tea down carefully. "Bram," she said, voice low enough that the ocean almost swallowed it. "I've been thinking about the trust." I tensed without meaning to. The trust, the legal fortress she'd built around the studio land decades earlier, was the thing my father had wanted most. The thing he'd nearly killed her to reach. After the trial, it had passed quietly into her full control again. We'd barely touched it since. "What about it?" I asked. "I want to change it." I looked at her. She was staring at the water, profile calm. "Change how?" "Make it irrevocable. Name beneficiaries who aren't blood. The community center. The scholarship fund for art students who can't afford supplies. Tamsin's clinic. She's been talking about expanding the free wing. And you, of course. But only what you need. The rest goes where it can do good without strings." I let out a slow breath. "You're cutting the family line out completely." "There is no family line left to cut," she said simply. "Your father made sure of that the day he carried a folder into my hospital room instead of flowers." She turned to me then. "I don't want anything I built to ever be used as leverage again. Not against you. Not against anyone." I nodded slowly. The decision felt heavier than anger ever had. Cleaner too. We met with the estate lawyer 2 weeks later. Papers were drawn. Signatures made. No ceremony. Just ink drying on pages that redrew the future. Afterward we drove to the studio lot. The original building still stood, though we'd leased most of it to a co-op of younger artists. My mother walked the perimeter slowly, touching fence posts, gate latches, the rough bark of live oaks that had shaded her easel for 30 years. She stopped at the spot where the old path curved toward the water. "I used to come here when I was pregnant with you," she said. "Sat on that bench over there and painted the same horizon every afternoon. I was terrified I wouldn't be good enough. That I'd ruin you somehow." She smiled, a small private thing. "I never imagined the person who'd try to ruin us would be the one who promised to love us both." I didn't have words for that. I just stood beside her until the light changed and mosquitoes found us. That night I dreamed of the cemetery again. But this time the grave was open and empty. Rain fell upward back into the sky. My mother stood at the edge, holding an umbrella over nothing. She looked at me and said very clearly, "It's time to close it." I woke with tears already drying on my face. The next morning I called Tamsin. She answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I just wanted to say thank you. Again. Properly." She laughed short, surprised. "You've said it 100 times. Not enough." "Was. You know what I think about most?" she asked. "That night in the cemetery. When you saw her and dropped the flashlight. I was watching from the trees. I thought if he runs now, if he can't handle it, everything collapses. But you didn't run. You walked straight to her like you'd been waiting your whole life for permission to believe she was still here." I swallowed. I almost didn't believe it. "But you did," she said. "And that made the rest possible." We talked a little longer. About her clinic expansion, about the new pediatric wing they were naming after my mother. When we hung up I felt something loosen in my chest. Not gone. Just lighter. Months later a letter arrived. No return address. Postmarked Charleston. Inside a single sheet of cream stationery. My father's handwriting. Still precise, still controlled. "Bram. I've had time to think. The sentence is long. The appeals are exhausted. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask for it. I only want you to know that I understand now what I lost. Not the money. Not the land. The mornings when you ran into the kitchen and climbed onto my lap with a drawing you'd made. The way your mother laughed when I tried to cook and failed. Those moments were real. I treated them like assets I could liquidate when I needed leverage. I was wrong. If there is any mercy left in you, tell your mother I'm sorry. Not for the trial. Not for the headlines. For the hospital room. For the folder. For choosing paper over people. I know it changes nothing. But silence changes less. Garrick. I read it twice. Then I carried it to the sunroom. My mother was cleaning brushes, sleeves rolled to her elbows. I handed her the letter without speaking. She read it slowly, expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded the page once, set it on the table. Do you want to reply? Yes. She shook her head. No. She picked up a brush, dipped it in clean water, let the color bleed out. But I'm not burning it, she said. I'll keep it in the drawer with the old sketches. Proof that even monsters can feel regret when it's too late to matter. She looked at me. And you? I don't hate him anymore, I said. I just don't miss him. She nodded once. That's enough. We never spoke of the letter again. But sometimes when the rain starts and I sit up listening, I think about that kitchen I used to run into. About the man who lifted me onto his lap and pretended the stick figure drawings were masterpieces. I don't forgive him. I don't need to. I've already chosen what matters more. Time doesn't heal. It recontextualizes. 5 years after the trial, I stood in the same Magnolia cemetery. Not at her grave because there was no grave anymore. We'd had the marker removed quietly the year after sentencing. The plot was reseeded with grass. Nothing left to visit except memory. I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to scatter. A small cedar box in my hands held the last of her ashes. She'd asked for this years earlier, before the diagnosis came back aggressive and fast. Pancreatic. Stage 4 before anyone caught it. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The body that had once been declared dead was now failing in earnest, and this time no nurse could redirect paperwork to save it. She'd laughed, dry, tired, when the doctor delivered the news. At least I get to choose the ending this time. We moved her care to hospice at home. The porch became her favorite place again. She painted until her hands wouldn't hold the brush steady, then switched to watercolor she could manage from the rocking chair. I sat with her every afternoon, reading aloud from books she loved, watching the light move across her face. She never asked for pity, never spoke of unfinished business. Only once did she bring up the past. Do you ever wonder, she said, voice thin, if I'd stayed gone, if I'd never come back, what would have happened to you? I looked at her. I'd have signed whatever he put in front of me, believed whatever story he told, become the son he needed to finish the paperwork. She nodded slowly. And then I'd have spent the rest of my life trying to feel something real again. Failing. She reached for my hand. Hers was cool, fragile. You saved me that night, she whispered. But you saved yourself too. The last week she slept more than she was awake. I stayed beside her bed, holding her hand through the morphine haze. Tamsin came every day. Off duty, no uniform, just a friend who knew how endings worked. On the final morning the rain started again. Steady. The same rain that had fallen the day of the fake funeral. She opened her eyes once, looked at me clearly. Close the circle, she said. Then she was gone. Quiet. Peaceful. No folder. No pressure. Just the sound of rain on the roof and my own breathing. We didn't have a large service. A handful of people. The community center kids now grown, artists she'd mentored, Tamsin, Raina Polk who'd covered the original story and stayed in touch. No press. No cameras. Afterward I drove alone to Magnolia. I walked to the empty plot. Nil. Opened the box. Ashes lifted on the wind before I could scatter them deliberately. Some caught in the grass. Some drifted toward the oaks. A few clung to my coat sleeves like they weren't ready to leave. I stayed until the rain stopped. When I stood, the box was empty. I didn't feel lighter. Felt complete. Back at the house I found an envelope on the kitchen table. My mother's handwriting on the front. For Bram. After. Inside 2 sheets. The first was a letter. My dearest boy. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here to say it out loud. I want you to know I was never afraid of dying. I was afraid of disappearing before I finished becoming myself. You gave me those extra years. You gave me the chance to paint what I really saw instead of what I thought people wanted to see. You gave me mornings on the porch with tea and silence that wasn't lonely. Thank you for believing the impossible that night in the cemetery. Thank you for not running. The second sheet was legal. Codicil to the trust. She'd added one final directive. Upon my death, the remaining assets, after scholarships, the clinic, the community center, were to fund a small residency program. Artists in crisis. Domestic violence survivors. People hiding from someone who once promised to love them. No questions asked. No last names required. 6-month stays. Studio space. Supplies. A quiet place to remember who they were before the paperwork tried to erase them. She'd named it the Maris Haven. I read the clause 3 times. Then I folded both pages and placed them in the drawer with my father's letter. Proof of endings. Proof of beginnings. Months later the residency opened. The first artist arrived in late autumn, a woman in her 30s with shadows under her eyes and a portfolio of charcoal drawings that looked like screams on paper. She didn't speak much the first week. Just work. Ate when reminded. One evening I found her on the porch, looking at the water the way my mother used to. "You're the son," she said. "Not a question." "I am." She talked about you. In the intake interview. Said the program existed because her son refused to let her disappear. I didn't know what to say. The woman looked at me. "I almost disappeared once. Thought it was safer. Thought if I vanished quietly, no one would get hurt." I paused. "Then someone found me anyway. Not to hurt me. To remind me I was still here." He smiled small, careful. "I'm staying the full 6 months. Maybe longer if they let me." "They will." I sat beside her. We watched the horizon until the light changed. That night I dreamed of the cemetery again. But this time the grave was filled with paint tubes instead of soil. My mother stood beside it, brush in hand, adding final strokes to a canvas that stretched across the headstones. The painting was the ocean at dusk, every color she'd ever loved bleeding into each other without apology. She looked at me. "Keep the porch light on," she said. I woke smiling. The next morning I walked the residency grounds, checked the studios, made sure the supplies were stocked, paused at the sign near the gate. Maris Haven. A place to remember you are still here. I touched the letters. Then I kept walking. Some funerals bury the dead. Some bury the truth. And some, when everything else is gone, bury the fear that you'll never be allowed to live again. We don't get to choose which funerals we attend. But we do get to choose what we build on the ground they leave behind. Choose light. Choose canvas. I choose the people who walk through the gate carrying their own unfinished stories. And every evening, no matter the weather, I leave the porch light on. Just in case someone needs to believe the impossible one more time. The porch light stayed on longer each evening after the residency opened. Not because I expected anyone specific to arrive, but because the habit had become a kind of quiet prayer. Let someone find their way here before the dark becomes permanent. The Maris Haven grew slowly, word of mouth mostly, carried by social workers, therapists, a few journalists who remembered the original story and chose not to sensationalize the sequel. We never advertised. We never needed to. The people who needed it most always seemed to know where to look. 3 years into the program I met Kiren. She arrived in early December, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even in South Carolina. A black sedan dropped her at the gate just after dusk. No luggage beyond a single canvas duffel and a portfolio case strapped across her back like armor. She was 31, though she looked younger in the way people do when exhaustion has hollowed them out. Dark hair pulled into a tight knot, eyes that scanned every shadow before settling on anything human. The intake coordinator, a former resident herself, handled the paperwork. Kiren answered questions in short, careful sentences. Domestic situation. Escalating threats. Restraining order in place but not always respected. No children. No family willing to intervene. She signed the waiver without reading it twice. I didn't meet her until the next morning. She was already in Studio 4, the one with the best northern light, when I walked the grounds with coffee for the early risers. The door was ajar. Inside, she stood in front of a blank canvas, charcoal in hand, staring as if the white surface had personally offended her. I knocked lightly on the frame. "Morning, Bram. I run things around here. Or try to." He turned. No smile. Just assessment. "Kiren," she said. Voice low, measured. "I don't need much. Just space. And quiet. You've got both. Rules are simple. No visitors without clearance, no sharing location, check in once a day so we know you're breathing. Everything else is yours." She nodded once, looked back at the canvas. I left her to it. For the first 2 weeks she barely spoke to anyone. She worked late, slept little, ate standing at the kitchen counter when the dining room felt too exposed. The other residents gave her space. Most of them recognized the early stages of recalibrating after too long in survival mode. I checked on her indirectly. Fresh linens left outside her door. A new box of charcoal sticks slipped onto her supply shelf without comment. One night the power flickered during a storm. The backup generator kicked in, but not before the dark swallowed everything for 30 seconds. When the lights returned, I found her in the hallway, back pressed to the wall, breathing fast and shallow. I didn't touch her, just spoke quietly from 6 feet away. "It's just the storm. Lights are back. You're safe." Her eyes flicked to me, then away. "I know," she said. But her hands were shaking. I waited until her breathing evened. "Want company for a minute? Porch is covered. Rain won't reach." She hesitated, then nodded. We sat in the dark, 2 rocking chairs between us, listening to water hammer the tin roof. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally she said, "Your mother started this place?" "Yeah." "Because of what happened to her?" "Partly. Mostly because she wanted somewhere people could disappear on purpose, long enough to remember who they were before someone tried to erase them." Kiren looked at her hands. "He didn't hit me at first. Just rearranged things. My schedule, my friends, my thoughts. Made it feel like I was the one breaking. By the time the bruises showed up, I already believed I deserved them." He paused. "I left once. He found me in 3 days. Said he was worried. Said he loved me too much to let me go. I went back because I was tired. Because believing the lie was easier than starting over." Another long silence. Then one night he locked the bedroom door from the outside. Left me there for 16 hours. No phone. No water after the first few. When he came back he acted like nothing happened. Brought flowers. Apologized for losing his temper. I smiled and thanked him because that's what you do when the alternative is worse. She looked at me, then really looked. "How did your mother get out?" "She didn't at first. She died. In paper. Then she came back." Kiren gave a small, broken laugh. "Wish I could pull that off." "You don't have to die to disappear," I said. "You just have to decide the story he wrote isn't the only one." She stayed quiet after that. But the next morning she started a new canvas. Not blank white anymore. Black gesso first, thick, deliberate. Then layers of red and violet, shapes that looked like hands reaching but never quite touching. She worked for 16 hours straight. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. When she finally stepped back, the painting was raw, furious, alive. She titled it "Revenge Looks Like This." I didn't ask what it meant. Over the next months Kiren changed the way people do when they stop waiting for permission to exist. She spoke more. Laughed sometimes. Short, surprised sounds like she hadn't expected them. Started teaching the newer residents basic charcoal techniques in the evenings. Her work grew bolder. Larger. Colors that didn't apologize. One afternoon she found me in the office sorting applications. "I want to stay," she said. "Past the 6 months. I'll pay rent. Or work. Whatever it takes." "We don't charge rent," I told her. "But we do need help. Studio maintenance. Intake support. You'd be good at it." She nodded. "I want to give back what I got here." She stayed. And she started something else. Every few months she organized what she called truth nights. Residents gathered on the porch after dinner. No phones, no recordings. One person spoke. The rest listened. No advice. No interruptions. Just space to say the things they'd never said out loud. Kiren went first the inaugural night. She talked about the locked door. The flowers. The way love had been weaponized until she couldn't recognize the word anymore. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The anger in her voice was clean, controlled, final. When she finished, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full. One by one others spoke. A man who'd lost custody because his ex called his grief instability. A woman whose parents had rewritten her childhood to make her the problem. A young artist whose mentor had claimed credit for years of her work. Each story different. Each ending the same. Someone had tried to bury them alive under someone else's version of events. And each time the porch light stayed on. Kiren's ex found her eventually. Not through leaks, we were careful, but through a careless mutual friend who saw a tagged photo from a gallery show she'd participated in downtown. The message came late one night. "I know where you are. We need to talk." He showed me the text. Her hand was steady. "I'm not running," she said. We called the local sheriff's office. Filed the violation report. Increased security around the perimeter. But Kiren didn't hide in her studio. She walked the grounds the next day like always. Painted. Laugh. He showed up 3 days later. Parked at the gate. Didn't try to enter. Just stood there holding roses like they were a passport. I met him before he could speak. "You're trespassing," I said. "Leave. Now." He looked past me toward the house. "I just want to see her. To apologize." "She doesn't want to see you." His face tightened. "She's confused. She needs me. She needs nothing from you." He stepped forward. I didn't move. Behind me the porch door opened. Kiren stepped out. She walked down the path slowly. Stopped 10 feet from the gate. He smiled, relieved, hopeful. "Kiren." She held up a hand. "Don't." He faltered. She spoke clearly, voice carrying over the gravel. "I used to think revenge meant hurting you back. Making you feel small. I was wrong." She looked at him without flinching. "Revenge looks like this. I wake up every day and choose myself. Paint what I want. I laugh when I want. I exist without asking your permission. And you get to watch from the other side of a gate you can't cross. That's it. That's all." He stared. He turned away. "Leave," she said over her shoulder. "And don't come back." He stood there another minute. Then the roses dropped to the ground. He got in his car. Drove away. No drama. No police. Just a man who finally understood he no longer had the power to rewrite her story. Kiren didn't celebrate. She went back to her studio and started a new piece. This one was quieter. Soft blues and golds. Shapes that looked like wings unfolding. She called it After. Years later the Maris Haven expanded. More studios, a small gallery space downtown, partnerships with shelters across the state. Kiren became co-director. Her work hung in collections now. Not because it was safe or pretty, but because it was honest. Some nights we still sit on the porch together. Not every night. Just when the rain starts and the old memories try to creep in. We don't talk about revenge anymore. We talk about what comes after. About how truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply refuses to stay buried. And how the kindest revenge isn't destruction. It's living so fully that the people who tried to erase you have to watch you thrive. Subscribe Revenge with Kiren if you believe revenge isn't always blood. It's sometimes just refusing to disappear.